and welcome to this, our fourth and final Gulf-wide StormSmart Coasts training session. We've got some great presenters today with some extremely useful information, and I'm really excited to hear what they've got to say. But before we get into that, I need to do just a little bit of quick housekeeping. Now, those of you who have joined us before will recognize this. The situation here is that we've had such a great turnout for these webinars that we aren't able to do a discussion format. Instead, we have to do sort of a lecture and then follow up with questions at the end. But we don't want anybody to lose any of those questions as we move through things. What we're going to ask you to do is if you can use the little toolbar you'll see on probably the right side of your screen. If you can type in the questions over there, we will make sure we gather those together and then address them towards the end of the session. Also, I should note that if anybody's having any technological problems, if the sound isn't working for you or if the slides aren't looking correct, you can feel free to type in the questions over there, and we've got people standing by who should be able to help you out. So again, welcome. Today we're going to be talking. This is the fourth, as I said, of our 4 Gulf-wide coastal storms planning, response, and recovery training courses. And throughout the day today, we're hopefully going to be passing on a lot of useful information for you. I would like to give a quick thank you to everybody who's participated in putting these all together, and in particular to the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, even more particularly the Coastal Community Resilience Team who's been sponsoring this. Those of you who aren't familiar with StormSmart Coasts, we are you get information directly from us. So we've got presenters today who have lots of information. We want you to get that information directly from the horse's mouth, as it were. Just as important, though, perhaps, is that we want to make sure that you leave the webinars knowing where to find additional information. There's so much new material coming out all the time. It's obviously too much for us to cover in one webinar or, in fact, one webinar series. So by the end of this session, you should have a good idea about where to go if you have questions about additional things, including perhaps contacting any of us who are leading the call today, or even the people who are involved in just listening in. This is an overview of the webinars of these training sessions, and you can see the first 3 of these are done. We started back in the end of February, and the first 3 sessions were spent on before the storm, which is probably appropriate that we spent the bulk of our 4 webinars on before the storm, since that's when all the work goes in. Today we're going to very briefly touch on what to do during the storm, and then after that talk about the ever important how you can recover from the storm event. Now, while I mentioned this is the last of 4 Gulf-wide webinars, we do have state-specific webinars set up for the Gulf states. The dates are up here now. We just set these. They are for 3 weeks from now. And we have Texas, you can see, on April 25th from 11 to 12, and Louisiana later in that day. Mississippi and Alabama will be on April 26th, with Florida in the afternoon of that time. So we will send out more information on this towards after this webinar. If you signed up right now, we'll let you know about how to sign up for those later. Which brings us into today's agenda. Again, 2 main topics, during the storm and after the storm. I'll be taking us through some information on emergency contacts just a little bit, and then telling you about a special new tool we've been building over at StormSmart that we're excited to reveal to you today. After that, we've got a couple of great speakers who will present on what to do after the storm. So after the storm rolls through, how do you recover, both for the natural habitat and for the built environment and sort of your social community. So let's begin. During the storm, the prime of information on during the storm, if you look at any of the StormSmart Coast websites, you will see we don't have a huge amount of information because we don't want you to be looking for a huge amount of information during a storm event. We want you to be able to quickly access great tools that are already out there. And there's no place better to go than the NOAA Extreme Weather Information Sheets. You can find a link for this on the screen right now. Also, if you go to any of the state pages, so for any of the Gulf states, and click on the During the Storm tab, you will see an easy way to download these very, very useful information sheets that have phone numbers and websites that you might need during a storm event. I should also note that they are available from that site. You can order them as laminated cards too if you think your computer system might go down, which is a fairly good bet. You might want to order one of those or several of those if you want to pass them out to other people that you work with. Now, I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on this new tool that we put together because, like I said, we do have some great credentials lined up for you today. But I did want to mention it, and there'll be lots more information coming about this later. But Storm Reporter is this tool that we have assembled to help people working during a storm or immediately after a storm to document the storm's damage. So it perhaps could fit more neatly in the after the storm section because we're not encouraging you to go out during a storm, which wouldn't be safe. But we did want a way, again, to document what damage happened for making quick decisions as emergency managers about where you need to send your limited resources. And also, it's been well received by people working in storm modeling because it allows them to see how a storm actually impacted the environment versus what the models predicted it would. All it does is it lets you fill out a form that looks something like this. And this was put together with different people working in the field. But it's a way to, again, document what has happened during a storm event. So you go out and you look and say, okay, these streets have been damaged. These are blocked. There's a way to upload photos. And then everything goes into a centralized database. One of the features in that database is the ability for people who are watching the storm come through and watching these reports come in to be able to get an update on what's going on. So that we have a page which updates, it refreshes itself automatically as new reports come in. And you can see it just pulls out the pertinent information. So in this particular area, you can see different, looks like stretches of roads that have rocks washed over them or whatever else. So it's just sort of a live feed. Up top, you can find the buttons which explain really everything the site does. You can get a list of reports. You can add a new report. You can see that live report stream we were just looking at. And this last button is only available for administrators. And again, lots more information on this on the site. But the thought here is that some states and or municipalities will want to be able to download all the data that has been put into their site by all the different storm reports. If you click this button, you can download the data itself, and you can also download all the photos. So for people who want to do GIS analysis later or whatever else, that's what makes it all possible. It also makes it easy to make that data portable. And really, that's all I want to do with this brief introduction, but I did want to note two things that are coming to Storm Reporters that aren't there yet because we get constant questions about this. One is that we are working on adding a map interface so you can see the reports where they show up geographically just from a quick glance through a visual interface. And we are, of course, working on an iPhone app that will allow you to go out and just take pictures and have that information sent straight into the database. And with that, I'm very happy today to be able to introduce a colleague of mine, Charles Hernick, who will be talking about some of the environmental processes that you want to think about after a storm goes through. Charles is an environmental policy consultant at the Cadmus Group. He manages a number of projects related to environmental finance, risk management, promoting sustainable drinking water systems, environmental markers like water and carbon markets, coastal planning for federal, state, and non-government clients. Charles has been invited to lecture on biodiversity, ecosystem services, and environmental markets both domestically and abroad. And before joining Cadmus, Charles and I worked together over at the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. Charles,
thanks, Wes, for
take it from here.
Thanks, Wes, for that introduction. And let me see if I get control of the slides here. All right. So here we're transitioning, from right after, from during and immediately after the storm to, really taking a look at how to, rebuild communities, after, a disaster event. And so we've got a new opportunity to look at how we're living, really within the coastal environment. And I think that one thing that's important for us to keep in mind is that many coastal communities were founded on industries like fishing, trade, and tourism. And these industries are really rooted in the quality of the natural environment. And we can take some time to, right after the storm, consider how to restore natural systems to create benefits for those communities, not just for the industries that are dependent on ecosystems, but also to protect communities from coastal hazards. So the key word that I hope you can walk away from today's presentation with is ecosystem services. And quite simply, these are the benefits that people obtain from ecosystems. The graphic that you see on this slide, some of you folks might remember it from before the storm, part 2. But this is from the folks in Louisiana, and it shows how to weaken the impacts of storm surge in residential areas. It focuses on, wetlands, dunes, and marshes being used to help regulate water flows and storm surge. But there's a number of other hazard moderating ecosystem services that are worth keeping in mind after the storm. One of those is wind protection from trees and shrubs, and reducing runoff associated with forested areas and other vegetated areas. And the key point, I think, is that we're not talking about a choice between conservation and restoration of natural ecosystems versus redevelopment, but really the goal is twofold. Number one, to promote economic development and redevelopment while reducing risks from coastal hazards by restoring ecosystems and really leveraging these ecosystem services. Now, it's not always possible to restore ecosystems in every area. So another option that's worth keeping in mind is doing the best you can to implement green infrastructure. Green infrastructure can often be a cost-effective substitute for gray infrastructure, and there I'm talking about the pipes, dams, levees that are traditionally used to control flooding. The point of green infrastructure is to leverage natural hydrologic features in controlled areas to provide benefits to your community. And I think that many of you are familiar with some examples that include rainwater harvesting, rain gardens, planter boxes, bioswales, permeable pavement, green alleys and streets, and green roofs. And while the primary reason that we're talking about ecosystem services, restoration, conservation, and green infrastructure is for the purposes of their hazard mitigation benefits, it's also important to remember the secondary or co-benefits associated with these types of projects or restoration efforts. Really, by protecting natural areas or mimicking natural functions, there are oftentimes opportunities to improve recreation or increase property values, and also lead back to those improvements to important industries like fishing and shellfishing. And the last slide here shows a number of different funding sources, both for restoration and conservation, and also for green infrastructure. For the green infrastructure piece, if you just Google U.S. Environmental Protection Agency green infrastructure, you're going to get links to a number of these different resources that are listed here. But one point that I'll make with funding for environmental restoration and conservation is that it's worth looking for partners, whether those be individual landowners who are willing to engage in conservation easements. There's of course the option of outright purchases by state, local, or federal governments, and those can be funded in a number of different ways. But also working with land trusts, hunting and fishing organizations that are interested in using those natural areas, and conservation organizations also. So Wes, I'll let you go ahead, and you've got an introduction to make.
I do, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce Ed Thomas. Ed has a long and very distinguished bio. Today he's joining us as the president of the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association, but he's got a lot of other things. But just to really quick run through a few highlights of what I know of what Ed has done. Ed retired from FEMA after nearly 35 years of public service. During that time in government, he worked primarily in disaster mitigation, preparedness, and response. He was also extensively involved in community development during his nearly 10 years with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Ed worked for about 200 200 disasters and emergencies, serving as the President's on-scene representative, the federal coordinating officer on dozens of occasions. Ed is an attorney, a frequent lecturer on emergency management issues, especially on constitutional and legal aspects of floodplain regulation. He's authored tons of publications and received many, many awards, including perhaps the most impressive to me is the highest award for floodplain management, the Goddard White Award from the Association of State Floodplain Managers. He's also received the Gulf of Maine Visionary Award from the Gulf of Maine Council and the first Lifetime Achievement Award from the Georgia Association of Floodplain Management. So Ed, we're very happy to have you here today and really looking forward to what you have to share. Ed, did we lose you or do we still have you muted? Ed, it looks like you're not muted on the system, so perhaps you're muted on your phone.
How's this now?
Ah, much better.
Okay,
great to hear your voice.
Great. I have to be not just unmuted on the phone, but also show it on the little green screen here. Hey, everybody. Sorry for that little technological glitch. We worked on this, and we thought we had it just smooth as silk, but one of those things. I live in a special flood hazard area, and we're going to talk about why such a thing could be for somebody that has worked so many disasters. But let's start with, we talk about natural disasters all the time, but is that fair? Does Mother Nature really cause disasters? Let's think about that. I think she does not. I think we're doing it to ourselves, and I think digging out of the incredible, bizarre mess we've taken our years and years to get into is going to take a lot of effort, and there is no one solution. We're going to be talking about everything from green infrastructure and emphasizing to business and industry that doing things safely and properly is good for their business, should look beyond government funding of green infrastructure into convincing people that this is the way for them to do it from the sheer profit motivation. And I'd like to mention something, keying off what Charles said. The Urban Drainage and Flood Control District in Denver, I know it's not a coastal organization, but they have the best publication I've ever seen on talking to developers about win-win solutions for green infrastructure, convincing business and industry that that's the right way to go from the get-go. But over and above and beyond that, we need to look at what Native Americans would call nania, or synergy, trying to make sure that we don't have disasters through things like preparation for individuals, for insurance, a disaster planning kit, thinking about this Silver Jackets program that the Army Corps of Engineers set up so that people are talking to each other ahead of time, thinking about disaster-resistant building codes, zoning, pre-disaster mitigation, or as our friends in the climate change community would talk about, adaptation, mutual assistance, disaster contingency planning, use of volunteers, Citizens Corps, and the incredible materials on the StormSmart Coasts website. All of that being pulled together. And let's think of this, as Charles said, in economic terms. I hope everybody on this call will agree that you simply cannot have a sustainable economy, or for that matter, any economy at all, without safe locations for business and industry to operate, and safe places for employees and ordinary citizens to serve those business and industry. And the great example of that, of course, is Hurricane Katrina.
Hey everyone, Ed may have gotten disconnected. We'll give him just a minute and see if he can dial back in.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. It's always amazing how everything that seems so smooth and simple can somehow get goofed up every now and again, but I'm sure we'll be right back with Ed.
Hey, Ed, can you speak again?
Folks, it looks like we have Ed back on here. He's connected back up to the system, so I'm sure we'll have him back here shortly.
Can you hear me now? Wes?
Loud and clear, Ed.
Oh, my God. I don't know what happened. Anyway, I'm glad I'm back. Howdy, folks. Hey, I'm real sorry about that. All I heard was a constant busy signal. Can anybody tell me were you able to hear the stuff about Katrina?
That's just when you cut out for us.
Okay. So, hey, Katrina, we had people, organizations, businesses that were ready to operate, and they didn't have personnel to sell to, or personnel to cook, to clean, and all the other stuff that you need for a tourist economy. And so we had, a cascading disaster. It was not just the people that were flooded, but it was the businesses that were actually perfectly ready to operate down in the French Quarter and really could not. Do I have control of the screen now? It's not turning. Here we go. Trends in flood damages. Damages are going up for wind, flood, earthquake, wildfire, all of that. And more people want to live in areas, people like me, who want to live in areas down near the ocean. Sea level rise is an established fact. It's been going on for literally thousands of years, and we're going to have more challenges from climate change. Army Corps of Engineers has pioneered this graphic talking about looking at the initial risk that we have in areas that will be subject to natural forces and getting those risks down through insurance, building code, zoning, core slides, so they talk about levee construction, contingency response plans, outreach, a whole lot of things. California has a slide, a similar slide, only they've got 23 things that drive down risks so that you have a smaller residual risk. But what's really going on in our nation is we start with a small initial risk. We have, throughout the nation, bad or no warning and evacuation plans. We have upstream developments increasing flood heights, lack of awareness, lack of proper insurance for business interruption or difference in conditions or for the casualty loss, critical facilities not protected from flooding, huge increased development, all very poorly designed, maintained infrastructure, and you have a vastly increased risk. I mean, we all know about the development along the coast. Here's Hawaii. Hawaii not that long ago, and now you've got tremendous development. So we have vast amounts of people living in harm's way, because we haven't done a proper job of taking care of preparations for foreseeable natural disasters with the pre-form stuff, the pre-flood stuff. Now we've got an opportunity, I think, after a disaster. That's one of the things about doing hazard mitigation planning or climate adaptation planning. Once you make your mistakes, Mother Nature will provide you an opportunity to go in and get it right. Used to be, when I first started with disaster assistance, there was a magic chant that you had to put on your applications that said you were going to return to pre-disaster conditions. But today, changing, doing things differently and better is established and quite well accepted. The question is how to do it. First thing is, and this is to those of you that are out that will be doing this eventually, is to recognize that post-disaster is a time of both danger and opportunity. It is a time for a hazards manager, for a coastal manager, or floodplain manager to absolutely shine or not. First thing to shine is to think about what you really want to say. Different things to different people, to public officials, to the media, to individuals, to business and industry. To recognize that when you're thinking of a disaster, be ready to ask for help, to be ready to do things differently than you do ordinarily day to day. You can easily burn yourself out working 80, 100 hours a week, week after week. You need to get more resources in there to help you, and we'll talk about some possible sources of that. You want to document things, as Charles talked about, and Wes talked about, not just in order to do this for good business practice, but also for potential reimbursement from various agencies and funding sources. To recognize that there are different sorts of disaster declarations. FEMA has some, Department of Agriculture has them, the Small Business Administration has them, and long before the disaster strikes or the problems take place, you want to be familiar with them. To recognize that today or yesterday before the storm or the flood or the other natural situation, you might have thought of yourself as a planner or a coastal regulatory specialist or a local official. But following the flood, you are an emergency manager. You're expected to act like one. You need to be ready to have different messages for different audiences. Dr. Vince Crivello suggests different messaging and a way of communicating in crisis. To recognize that in a crisis or a post-disaster situation, everyone's level of understanding declines by approximately 2 grades in school. So if yesterday you were dealing with someone who was a college graduate, today you're dealing with someone with the understanding of college sophomore. Just to keep it in that perspective. To recognize that you want to be able to communicate what is often referred to as an elevator speech, a message of no more than 3 parts, no more than 9 seconds, 27 words. Vince has honed this, and to be ready with this message long before the disaster takes place. One of Vince's students was a guy named Rudy Giuliani, and long before the attack on America of 9/11, Rudy Giuliani was ready with a message to communicate whether it was a dirty bomb in the New York subway or some other catastrophe. He was ready to communicate a message of patience and hope, and from that he became, of course, known as America's mayor. And to recognize that while the core concepts you want to get across may be the same, there's going to be different messages for someone that is looking at things from the perspective of environmental protection versus a taxpayer rights advocate or a Tea Party supporter or a municipal manager worried about tax revenue. Different emphasis, different method of conveying, and you're the one that's going to have to figure that out, who you're talking to recognize one of the 7 habits of a highly effective person is to talk to somebody, to understand where they're coming from so that you're ready to communicate with them. During a crisis, everybody is stressed. Stress lowers comprehension, and boy, does it increase the potential for anger and rage. While there's an opportunity for change, hazard mitigation, adaptation is about change. And let me be clear, following a disaster, most people do not want change. What they want is a return to their fond memory of yesterday. Maybe not the way you and I think their yesterday was, but they want to forget about this nasty event and they want to go back to the way things were. And they want government to leave them alone, get out of their way, and government's challenge is to induce change in order to help those people build a better future. We need to be ready to persuade, to negotiate. I've got a whole module that I do for stormwater managers and floodplain managers on negotiations, and one of the lines at the end is we've got to negotiate in a positive way, stop being the abominable no people, to recognize that the community is, generally speaking, for development. At the same time, for a safe place for citizens to live, a safe place for people to recreate, to recognize that often the fundamental underpinnings of the community are tourism or ecotourism or fly fishing or kayaking or something else beyond just sheer development, and to consider the entire community as we develop and to channel emotion into action. One of the key ways of doing this is to not start with a no. I am against starting a discussion with a no. We want to say what we're for. We want to be able to convey to the property owners, to the developers, to the community officials that we really want to help you. We convey the idea to you, really want to go through a mess like this again. We want you to rebuild. We want you here. We want your tax revenue. We desperately need it. But we want to do this safely to build a better future for you. And then after you say that, if you have to say, but we can't do it just the way you want, to really know your stuff, to understand the implications of your evacuation plan, to understand the life safety considerations of evacuation, to develop a plan B, come up with coalition and partnerships. We talked about this numerous times in these webcasts. Think about who shares your interest and consider the worst case. So what's really going to happen if I have to say no to this particular development the way this person wants to do it, and maybe I get fired? But then also think about, is that really the worst case? Is the worst case possibly you getting coerced into saying yes to something that you should have said no to, and then getting to live with that for the rest of your life? And I call that the mirror test. To be ready to take actions, to do the best you can, and possibly, things will not go well for you on the job. And will you be ready to look at yourself in the mirror following the decisions that you make? To recognize that safe and proper construction, safe development, is generally sustained against constitutional challenges. And we have numerous linkages to information on the StormSmart Coasts website, lots of publications on this, a law review article that I've written with myself and my friend and mentor, Dr. John Kussler, and Sam Riley Medlock from the Association of State Floodplain Managers, recognizing that the goal of protecting the public is afforded enormous deference by the courts, and properly so. To recognize that taking lawsuits against clearly hazard-based regulation that is fairly applied are almost universally upheld. But many, many cases where communities and landowners are held liable for harming other people. For us to be ready with messages, this is a message for our friends in housing and community development, that their rules and their laws are that development is supposed to be decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable. Flooded development, development that blows down in a windstorm, development that's consumed in a wildfire or an earthquake, is indecent, unsafe, unsanitary, and unaffordable by the flood victims, their community, the state, and nation. Please, I can't overemphasize asking for help, understanding the different types of disaster declarations that exist, the different sorts of assistance that you may be able to get. You are now an emergency manager. You have to be ready to document your costs. A lot of this is laid out in the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association publication on the patchwork quilt strategy. It's downloadable for free. It's based upon literally years of understanding and combined total, I think the 5 authors, we've got close to 100 years of experience in post-disaster stuff. To understand that there is a great publication from FEMA. It's a little bit outdated on the legal section. It's FEMA 480, Understanding the Flood Program. Understanding in a post-disaster context the substantial damage, the substantial improvement requirements of the flood insurance program is really key to helping to induce that change that I'm talking about, that change for a different and better community. FEMA has workshops on this. They are working closely with the codes councils on this kind of stuff. A lot of material out on substantial damage, substantial improvement. We don't have a lot of time to go through this. I've come up with the 10 P's of post-disaster reconstruction, the patchwork quilt P's. One is to think broadly. We've got to think about future generations. We've got to think about posterity. We've got to put the people first. We've got to work with everybody that's involved in the disaster, whether it's a taxpayer or a visionary expert or someone that's deeply concerned about the environment. Get everybody involved, including the disaster victims and survivors. Think about a lot of different programs, and we'll talk about that in a minute, to think persistently. We've just got to keep working on stuff to focus in on the problem, not the impediments, but rather how can we solve it, bringing resources together, communication, thinking about how the skeptics view this, and trying to overcome people's inherent desire to return to the way things used to be. When we hit a roadblock, to be prudent. We want to be persistent but prudent, and recognize that all of this post-disaster stuff involves a lot of personal decisions, tremendous complexity of what people want, what they can afford, and trying to talk to them to understand that the reason they may be opposing you is not that they really are opposed to change necessarily, but that they just feel that they can't afford it. And there's all sorts of methodologies of helping them do that. To be proactive, we've got to get out in front of this to try and take opportunities to expand your staff, to find volunteers, and to be patient with each other. Try to practice patience yourself, and to convey the idea that there will be help available for everyone. And to be ready in our messaging to convey these ideas as plain common sense that sound right. Now, how do we do this? The most important thing is leadership. We've got to find people that will be leaders, whether it's a community official or a business person or someone from the voluntary agencies. There are a good foundation now for planning for recovery. There are hazard mitigation plans out there for the Native American tribes, for the state, the locals. Many schools, businesses have some type of plan. They want to think about the strategy. FEMA has a long-term recovery group in the emergency support function number 14. There are statewide initiatives that are often formed following a disaster. We need to think about who all can help provide the technical assistance and supports and how it can be funded. FEMA can often fund a great deal of that. Foundations can. Businesses can. Often I found that the key to post-disaster successful reconstruction is a local business that will perhaps lend an executive for a little while. But there are a huge number of mitigation programs. It's not just about NOAA or about FEMA or about the Corps, and it's not just about the federal government. There are state programs. Charles mentioned some of the coalitions that we can bring. I was trying to do an effort to turn an area that was a perpetual levee problem in the upper Midwest into a nature preserve, and the key to putting that funding over the top was duck stamp money. Voluntary agencies active in disaster, the Red Cross, the church groups, the 14 or 15 of those organizations can be really key. FEMA has funds for individuals, all sorts of different sorts of things. Temporary housing can be key. There are grants from FEMA. There is public assistance money, and for those of you that are in the public sector or are associated with nonprofit agencies, this is critically important, providing funding for reconstruction. And I'd like to specifically mention that public assistance funds called Section 406 mitigation, this is often ignored, not included in your pre-disaster planning or your post-disaster. This is a funding source where FEMA can specifically, for eligible private nonprofit agencies, for public reconstruction, FEMA can provide the funds to do cost-effective hazard mitigation so that something that is broken is fixed correctly. For historic structures, FEMA has a special initiative with a great deal of technical support. It has a pre-disaster mitigation program, which unfortunately was zeroed out in the President's proposed 2013 budget, but it did enable us to do simple things like what's on the picture here, of something as simple as this simple metal barrier for floodwaters entering a building can prevent millions of dollars of damage depending upon the building. Of course, you've got the flood insurance program, which is really key for your coastal homeowners and your businesses, which includes this increased cost of compliance, extra money to help elevate something. You've got programs like the IRS casualty loss, which is often the first money that people will see. It enables people to deduct from their taxes, either in the current year or future years or in past years, the damages that have taken place on their property. There are HUD funds, Small Business Administration funds, which include hazard mitigation. The Economic Development Administration often has funds. And we want to think broadly. I want to mention tornado safety. We've got programs that will help people design. So if they're rebuilding and they're in an area that may be prone to a tornado or tornadic activity, they can rebuild safely and properly and put a safe room in. USDA has many, many programs. NOAA has the Storm Ready program. All sorts of programs exist, government, non-government, and I suggest that there's no shame in getting out there and hustling and begging and pleading to help, not just for the disaster victims for today, but for tomorrow too. I will mention a case study. This actually took place. I was thoroughly involved in this. In an area in Oklahoma, Miami. It's a Miami case study, and it's just not the coastal Miami. Area had flooded so often that local officials really, their hearts went out to these people. Some of these people had been flooded 19 times in the past 25 years. And the local officials were very seriously considering waiving all rebuilding requirements so that the people could just get on with their lives, get government out of the way. And there's an article. It is now up on the StormSmart Coasts website someplace. I don't have the linkage listed here, but we can get it to you. And basically, we managed to persuade the local officials that, look, if you do this, you're going to have all sorts of troubles with FEMA and the flood insurance program. If you don't enforce the minimum standards of the flood program, there's suspension, there's the potential for probation, a whole lot of really nasty things, and there's the potential for litigation. On the other hand, programs do exist that will help these people rebuild their lives safely and properly. The local officials made the correct decision, and the area was rebuilt much, much nicer than it had been before. So this can be done, it is done, and we can negotiate our way to this. Fundamentally, let's be really clear about this. We as a society will choose either better standards that protect people and resources and our lives in the future, or standards that will inevitably result in both destruction and litigation. Higher standards promulgated by FEMA for their community rating system are headed in the right direction. The work of the Silver Jackets teams, whatever they're called in the various states, is also producing great results. You can download Patchwork Quilt, as I mentioned, it's free. Another publication I want to mention is a joint American Red Cross FEMA publication on repairing your flooded home. I would recommend that anyone that's connected with coastal flooding have a couple of these kicking around, maybe even get a little stash of them. It is incredibly good, well-done information from the point of view of the homeowner, helping them understand the requirements for rebuilding, helping them understand things like mold and mildew and their own safety. It's written for local officials. I want to mention National Hazard Mitigation Association. It is a forum for professionals like you. We try to be a source of training and technical information to serve as the voice of hazard mitigation folks nationally, to help achieve a culture of mitigation, to help think about the professionalization of this new profession, to think about how we can do a more effective hazard mitigation program, to do adaptation for all the changes that are out there. A lot of people involved. The ordinary dues are $50 a year, students for a mere $15. We'd like to help you take action. With that, Wes, do I want to turn this back over to you, or shall I keep going with these?
Yeah, if you want to, we'll have Charles toss it back over to me. I'll be happy to take it from here.
Okay.
Ed, thank you so much. That was great, and a lot of information in there. And I do want to do something real quickly here, which is as soon as we pop over to, I think we should be able to see my screen now. I wanted to note that those of you who were listening may have wished that you had a chance to write everything down. We will make these slides available. I'll show you where in just 1 second. But I do want to note one section in particular that you might find useful on StormSmart Coasts. If you go to the StormSmart Coasts homepage and click on any of the states, you will end up on the state page. If you click on the funding tab up here up top, you will see here that we have a bunch of these. I want to leave a little bit of time here for questions at the end, so I don't want to spend too much time going over other things, but we certainly do want to remind you that this is all good and well, but only really changes things when you put things into action. So we're hopeful that you will take the information that you've gained from this and other webinars and whatever resources, anywhere you found them, and put them into action. It is certainly most useful if you work united as a community, because there's a lot of stuff to do, and no one person can do it alone, as Ed did such a good job of pointing out. So the next step, as far as the webinars go, we do have these statewide webinars. We had those dates earlier, and we will send those out to you as well. StormSmart Coasts, I just showed you a moment ago. StormSmart Connect is a great spot to stay in contact with one another and also to ask questions. Just to switch back over. Those of you not familiar with StormSmart Connect, it looks something like this when you land on it. Up here, there's a tab that says Training. If you click on that training, you can find information about each of the webinars we've had so far, and we'll put the state signups on here very soon, probably later today. I also want to point out a thing here, which is a button. Click on this button, and you'll end up on our StormSmart training group on StormSmart Connect, which is important because inside the group there's a Documents tab, and here you can find the slides from all the previous presentations. And the reason that they're not up yet is that we go through and turn all of the links, everything we talk about, we try to turn into a link so you can click on it. So you can download the PDF and you can access any of the many things that Ed talked about, even the things he didn't have time to talk about. We will put resources in there for that. It's also a spot where you can ask questions if you have any others, and we will make sure that those end up answered by Ed or Charles as appropriate. So with that, that, I would like to, again, thank both of our presenters and switch it over and see, Charles, do we have any questions that we wanted to jump into here? Charles, if you're there, you're still on mute, it looks like, so we'll give you a second to interrupt me here. While that's going on, I also want to note that those of you who are looking for continuing education credits, those are also available over on our group site. It's this link right here. If you click on this link, the Association of State Floodplain Managers is offering a CEC credit for attending these webinars. So all you have to do is go in here and fill out the form and send it in, and we will take it from there. You won't get an email confirmation or anything, but we will relay the information on. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let us know. Charles, have we got you back online over there?
Yeah, can you hear me right now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So we do have a number of questions, and it looks like just enough time to hopefully get through them. Wes, you mentioned the iPhone app for Storm Reporter. There's a number of Android users out there, and one of them asked if there's going to be one for the Android.
That's a great question. I would like to think so, yes. I mean, certainly we're trying to start with the most common versions of operating systems, because there are at least 3 that we could go with. Those of you with Android who may not get it right in the first round, there is a mobile-friendly version of the site. So if you visit stormreporter.stormsmart.org on your mobile device, you will end up in a special site which is optimized for viewing on a phone. It doesn't offer all of the features. It won't be able to allow you to take pictures because you can't take pictures with your browser. But yes, it's certainly on the list of things we'd like to get to eventually.
Thanks, Wes. Another question here, does the StormSmart Coast website include Georgia? We've got folks participating from the extreme southeast part of Georgia, about 30 miles from Jacksonville.
You know what, we don't yet, and that is something we'd certainly like to do. That said, there's a lot of stuff on, well, perhaps, I mean, you're not so far from Florida. I realize their regulations are different from yours, but that might be a good thing to just take a quick look at what's over there. And at some point, we would certainly love to more formally open a StormSmart Coast site for Georgia, but certainly StormSmart Connect will offer you a lot of information as well.
All right, thanks, Wes. Next question here. It was mentioned that most hazard regulations are generally supported by courts. Is there a breakdown of these cases or a report that summarizes where many hazard regulations are supported by the courts? And I think that, Ed, this is probably a question for you.
Yeah, and the answer is absolutely yes. I have a list of publications that I have done that includes a law review article, and law review articles actually are capable of being cited in most, since they're peer-reviewed journals, you can cite them in court documents. So the answer is yes, and I believe we have such a list up on the StormSmart Coasts website, and if we don't, we'll get it there. Myself, Dr. John Kussler, Sam Rowley Medlock have written extensively on this. Many of those are on the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association website, and many more are on the Association of State Floodplain Managers website on their publications page under legal documents.
Thanks a lot, Ed. That's a helpful answer. I've got another question here for you, and this relates to some of the conflicts or, I guess, challenges that folks deal with right after, right after a storm in terms of redevelopment. Where is the biggest conflict that you've seen? Is it when like a zoning or development plan doesn't line up exactly with now after a storm where how things maybe best would be redeveloped?
I think the biggest conflict lines up, let's be real clear about this, between the economics of this, the clear, obvious economics of the situation and maybe the more subtle economics. The reality in the longer legal workshops I do, I talk about the externalizing of costs. The reality of the situation we have in this nation is that we have an externalization of costs. Developers and local governments especially, to some extent the people who live in the special flood hazard area, get the benefits. The public taxpayer pays for those benefits. And because of that, when you are dealing with the possibility of saying, gee, this really wasn't the best site for this business, industry, or home, from the point of view of the society as a whole, it may have seemed to be the best site to put that home, business, or industry right back there from the point of view of the decision makers in the local government, because that business, industry, or home pays a huge premium on taxes because it's worth a lot more, and yet it draws down very few services. So that is perhaps the biggest fundamental difficulty, is to show that what we're talking about really makes good economic sense for the local decision maker.
Thanks, Ed. Another question, this one relates to messaging. And you mentioned getting your message down to 27 words, and you had the example from New York after 9/11. I was wondering if you could give another example, either of where messaging, where folks really got the messaging right, or on the flip side, where the messaging was really wrong and folks made more work for themselves.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about the messaging being wrong very easily. It's all over the place. Dr. Vince Crivello, in his lectures to us at events sponsored by the National Association of Flood and Stormwater Managers and by FEMA, talked very specifically about Michael Brown's messaging during Katrina as being an example of very, very poor messaging. And other people that are really skilled messengers, attorneys. The message that was given by General Schwarzkopf to Barbara Walters, there are messages Crivello cites as being absolutely classic examples of how to convey your point of view, even in the face of someone that absolutely hates your guts. And apparently Barbara Walters, when she interviewed General Schwarzkopf, hated the war that he was in charge of and actually had a dislike for him. And he was able to still convey a message that that sounded absolutely brilliant and heartfelt and took the wind out of her sails. So it can be done. The message, the key is understanding the other person. The message that I give someone who comes up to me and says, I'm here, I hate government, and I want to protect property rights. My message is, boy, so do I. I am a property rights zealot. I'm glad to meet another property rights zealot. I, of course, am talking about protecting the property and rights of everyone in the community, just like a good libertarian philosopher would say, which is that government exists to stop us from harming each other. It is a fundamental duty of government. And I agree with you. There's nothing like saying to someone, I agree with you, to take the wind out of their sails when they appear to be trying to oppose you. So there are a number of, perhaps the word is tricks, but techniques that can be used. Think about how it is that these people really agree with you and do what I call bureaucratic jujitsu and turn around their anger into basically trying to agree with you. Doesn't mean that you're going to win every time, but it does mean that you can properly convey. Telling the local official that is vehemently opposed to any regulation that's going to stand in the way of folks rebuilding their lives and saying, hey, that is really bold because that can lead to lawsuits against local officials. Let me explain why that is. And at the same time, it's going to hurt these people in the long run because they're going to get flooded again. To know your stuff, to understand about evacuation and the dangers of evacuation, the dangers of flooding, and then being able to convey that point of view, and then to turn around, if it's an environmentalist, to say, boy, you're absolutely right. We need to protect our environment in order to protect our economy, and let's work together on coming up with a methodology of redoing something. The folks from the duck stamp program where I worked on restoration really did not especially care about hazard mitigation or FEMA or me. What they cared about is building an area for habitat for ducks.
muted.